Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. Well, I want to start off today. Obviously, it's game day. I feel like we've covered a lot of the different things in terms of the game. I do have a couple little tidbits, we can cover those in a little bit, but I want to start off with this because, again, we're kind of in playoff times, although the odds of us not getting into the playoffs are relatively low, so we don't need to necessarily worry about it or panic unless and until we start losing. But still, it's interesting to look at, and also not only for the Packers, but different scenarios. Chances to not only be in the playoffs, but chances to have a bye week and beat the Lions out or whoever else it may be. All these kind of things are in play. Also, I just kind of want to look at the most impactful games this week that are going to help and hurt us. And part of the reason why I want to talk about especially this week is because it's a very weird week. And what I mean by that is there are three teams that I and some of you have been rooting against a lot that we may need to root for this week. Number one, and this is not necessarily true, and we'll get to why, but you can make a case for it. You may actually want to root for the Lions. Now, it's very unlikely that the Bears mount some kind of a massive comeback, especially considering they have another Packers game, they have a Lions game, they have a Vikings game. They've got a really tough stretch. But if you look at the New York Times simulator, although it doesn't really move the needle much, it is actually slightly higher probability of us getting into the playoffs if the Lions win compared to the Bears winning. Why? Because the Lions are very obviously going to the playoffs, so it doesn't matter. The Bears coming and overtaking us or whatever, although almost impossible, that probability is there. Again, very unlikely, but just for the sake of the whole, this is a weird week, just go with it, okay? Number two, we want to root for the Vikings. Now, this is actually going to be even more interesting when we start looking at the number one seed. The Vikings are actually more irrelevant than the Lions. In every which way, aside from when we play the Vikings, they are the most irrelevant team to us. They mean nothing. Aside from maybe bragging rights of being the number 2 compared to the number 3 in the division, other than that, it means absolutely nothing. Beyond that, they're playing the Cardinals. The Cardinals do matter. The NFC West matters because not only is there going to be that team that has to get in, but then there's going to be another team that's threatening us, and pretty much all of them are threatening us. Not by a ton. They're all a good chunk behind us, but essentially they're there. Now, again, neither really move the needle a ton, but if we're really trying to make sure that we get into the playoffs, you're rooting for the Lions, you're rooting for the Vikings, and the other team that we need to root for is the Jets. Jets are playing the Seattle Seahawks, so for the exact same reason that we are rooting for the Cardinals, we're rooting against the Cardinals, we're rooting against the Seahawks. There are a couple other teams that matter. They don't seem to matter as much, presumably because of their upcoming opponents. I don't really know, but as far as the odds go, Saints, Rams, Bills, 49ers don't matter as much, but probably a good idea to go ahead and root against them anyways. The other game that probably isn't going to matter because they're going to lose, but we should be rooting for the Carolina Panthers to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, though, the biggest game is Packers-Dolphins. Now, if we lose, it doesn't really matter other than to say, I'm worried that we're going to start losing a bunch of games and then our odds are really going to start to plummet. If we lose to the Dolphins, our odds of getting into the playoffs are 91%. If we win, it's 98%. So, bottom line, the Packers absolutely control their own destiny. It isn't going to matter all that much. But you also need to recognize we're probably going to lose a couple games here. And so there may come a time when we're going to need a little bit of help. And so although it doesn't matter today, rooting for, again, let's I think I missed a couple, so let's go through. Rooting for the Chargers to beat the Falcons, the Vikings to beat the Cardinals, the Jets to beat the Seahawks, the Titans to beat the Commanders, the Saints to beat the Rams, kind of, the Panthers to beat the Bucks, and the Bills to beat the 49ers. It couldn't hurt, let's put it that way. But let's look at getting a bye. Now, there's very, very, very little chance of this happening. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, we know that we're going to have to run the table. Let's just say that. If we're going to get a bye, we have to run the table. So let's say we do. First of all, even if we run the table, the odds of us getting a bye are only 25%. The reasons for that are relatively obvious. There are several teams that are out in front of us. In fact, there are actually two teams that matter the most. It's actually only two teams we need to worry about. You'd think that there's three, but there isn't. Why did I say earlier that the Vikings are completely irrelevant? I couldn't figure this out. I was going through the simulators, and they're kind of color-coded. It shows which ones matter, and I'm like, why don't the Vikings move the needle? And I thought, well, maybe it's because right now, the Packers with the simulator, I have it set at 14 wins. The Vikings have 9, so maybe as they start winning, it starts to matter. It didn't occur to me because I'm stupid until I finished the entire thing, and I had the Vikings also win out with the exception of the Packers game. What happens if the Vikings win out minus the Packers game? Both teams are 14-3, and the Packers would win the tiebreaker according to this. The reason being, I'm trying to think here. I think because the Packers in the division would be 4-2, the Vikings would be 3-3. So again, Vikings irrelevant. All we have to do is win out. The two teams that do matter, however, are the Lions and the Eagles. And so that's why I said earlier on, very slim chance you want to root for the Lions over the Bears, but it doesn't move the needle. What does move the needle is the fact that if the Bears, again, we're assuming the Packers win out, right? That's the first thing. So I'm not saying these are the odds generally because the odds of us winning out are not super high. If the Bears beat the Lions, our odds jump from 25% up to 41%. If the Ravens also beat, let's say if both things happen, our odds become settling about 53%. You got to remember, winning out also means we beat the Lions, right? So that's also already baked into the pie. But here's kind of how I got this shaken out. This could actually get very interesting, okay? Again, we're assuming, so let's just say that this is how it goes along, because I think this could make sense. Remember, the three teams, Packers, Lions, and Eagles, are the three teams you got to pay attention to. Week 13, Packers beat Dolphins, Lions beat the Bears, Ravens beat the Eagles. That's all not only likely, it's probable. Maybe the Eagles are kind of a little bit more iffy. Maybe Packers, Dolphins, I'm not sure exactly. But let's just say that happens. I think that's reasonable. Week 14, remember, we assume Packers beat Lions on Thursday. Okay, that's already assumed. Eagles beat Panthers, because obviously. Week 15, the Lions play the Bills. The Eagles play the Steelers. Packers play Seahawks. Packers win. Let's say the Steelers beat the Eagles, which is certainly possible, and the Bills beat the Lions, which I think is very possible. All right? Week 16, Lions beat the Bears. Packers beat the Saints. At this point, interestingly enough, the Eagles don't matter anymore. For whatever reason, I'm not going to try to figure out why. Bottom line is they don't matter anymore. So we don't have to worry about them at this point. So the Lions beat the Bears, Packers beat the Saints in week 16. Now week 17 rolls around. Here's the interesting thing. Week 17 and 18, the Packers beat the Vikings and the Packers beat the Bears. Okay? If the Lions lose to either the Vikings or the 49ers, the Packers will get the bye. This is a very doable scenario. Now, obviously, it becomes massively more likely if the Bears end up winning. So I'm really hoping, despite the fact that I hate the idea of the Bears being kind of scary, if the Bears win, this becomes much, much, much more likely. Again, remember, for the 40th time, Packers have to win out. But it's far from the Packers hold their destiny in their hands. The Packers do hold a lot in their hands. If the Packers can win out, which is not impossible, there are tough games. I think this is a tough game. The Lions are a really tough game. If they can really turn it on right now, if they can win out the rest of the season, they will be at worst second in the division. That's already locked up. And based on the Lions' schedule with one assumed loss, they've got some tough games ahead. They have to, again, beat the Buffalo Bills. That is not going to be an easy thing to do. Actually, let's back this up because this also is kind of assumed here. Packers win out, meaning the Lions lose to the Packers, and they also lose to the Bills, let's just say. Okay? If the Lions lose one other game, it doesn't matter what it is, the Packers are locked up based on this whole scenario. So if the Packers win out, and we assume the Lions lose to the Bills, which can't be assumed, but let's just say any other game, if they lose this week to the Bears, the Packers have it locked up. If they lose next time to the Bears, they have it locked up. If they lose to the 49ers or if they lose to the Vikings, if they lose any of those games. So another way to put this is if we win out, we are in a very good chance to take this thing. And the problem for the Lions is that they pretty much have to win out. They can have one additional loss, which would be, again, the Bills. Or not, it doesn't matter. But they're allowed one additional loss. If they lose 2 games, they will not get the bye. And then it kind of comes down to the Eagles. But again, they're going to be out of it pretty quickly if they can't handle business. But again, they have to have some losses. So if the Eagles are able to beat the Ravens, that's going to be a problem because that's one that we really needed. So Eagles-Ravens is a massive game, more so than Lions-Bears. That's going to be an afternoon game on Sunday, obviously. But as far as today's games, just keep that in the back of your head, right? So the playoffs are more or less locked up. None of the games today matter aside from the Packers as far as their playoffs are concerned. And even if they lose, they still got a really good chance of making the playoffs. If we really start to buckle down, though, and say, let's start the path to dominance and win out the season, this Bears-Lions game becomes very important. Not necessarily because if the Lions win, then we're in big trouble. More so, if they lose to the Bears, they kind of are backed up against a wall a little bit. To the point where it's like, okay, we really need to be that team because we got Bills coming up and we got Packers coming up. And if we lose to the Packers next week, it's a problem. In fact, the Detroit Lions right now have a 68-69% chance of getting that first round bye. If they lose to the Bears, it drops to 42%. If they lose to the Packers, it drops to 16%. So from a momentum standpoint and just from it feels like the Lions are just going to be gifted this thing that it's automatic. No, if they slip up even once, they could be in trouble. And remember, this is also the Vikings. I mean, we're looking at it from a standpoint of, if we win out. But you got the Eagles, you got the Vikings, you got the Packers. Yeah, quite a few teams nipping at your heels. And again, one little slip up can be a problem for you. So it's unlikely, but teams have bad days. Teams can fall asleep. It's a weird day because it's Thursday. The Lions also potentially got a little bit of a peek ahead because you're probably a little bit more concerned with the Packers than you are with the Bears. So there is a chance here with the Bears kind of catching a little steam. They probably should have beat Washington. They probably should have beat the Packers. They probably should have beat the Vikings. That would have put them at 5, 6, 7-4 instead of 4-7 on not a 3-game win streak because I think there was a game in between Washington and Green Bay, but whatever. Point is, things get real interesting if the Lions slip here because now you're looking at, again, I know the Lions are good. I'm not saying that they're not good, but we also have to remember that, again, the Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, they've been picking on bad teams. If you want to count the 49ers as a bad team, I think most people probably would, especially with the injuries. At least mediocre. What happens when these teams face actual good teams? And you can look at the Lions running up the score. That's great. Some teams are good at running up the score against bad teams. I think Miami is doing that. That doesn't answer the question of how you perform against good teams. It's not impossible when they start facing some resistance, when they start fighting inside the division. And they've been successful in the division so far. But we're just looking for that one little slip. So, again, it's unlikely. I think the Lions probably beat the Bears. And, decent chance it's by a decent margin because Bears are kind of a bad team. And what do the Lions do to bad teams? They beat the living crap out of them. But anyways, I thought it'd be fun to kind of take a look at that and see what our future holds and what it is we're actually battling for right now. Because this is, as I said, a very unusual year with the Packers being third in the division, being right now, I believe, the 6th seed with an 8-3 record. Very, very unusual. But Why don't we take our first break, and we'll be right back. All right, so there's a couple little interesting nuggets, and again, it's hard to pin anybody down because the Dolphins have been kind of a different team the last 3 weeks, but just going off of the information that we have, there's a lot of really good news here. A lot of it is our offense against their defense. First of all, as we've said before, I've given the stats in the cold to us like 0 and something, I don't know, 4 or 7 or whatever. The Dolphins are 0 and 11 in their last 11. They don't do well in the cold, and that was below 40. The temperature expectation right now is in the 20s. I'll check as I'll double check when we get to the third segment when I go through that stuff. But it's going to be around 20 degrees, chance of flurries, cloudy, whatever. It's going to be cold. Not only 20, but you got 20 plus mile an hour wind gusts, so the wind chill is going to be a little sucky. But here is the first one that I wanted to highlight. This comes by way of NFL Pro. Looking at Jordan Love against the Dolphins defense, Jordan Love has thrown deep 20-plus air yards at the second highest rate in the NFL this season, 15.4%, completing 17 of his 43 passes, 39.5% rate, for 640 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Love's 640 deep yards are second most in the NFL. The Dolphins have allowed the 6th highest completion percentage, 43.8%, the 3rd highest passer rating, 130.2, against deep passes this season. So bottom line, whether it's effective or not, and whether Jordan Love is very good at it or not, for whatever freaking reason, we're constantly pushing the ball down the field. I feel like Jordan Love is turning into Aaron Rodgers, very quickly. He's becoming panicky in the pocket. He constantly has to push the ball down the field when you really just don't want him to, and you want him to just play within the structure of the offense. But whatever. The guy likes to take his deep shots. The point is, though, this apparently is a team and a defense that struggles to stop that. If there ever was a time that first play of the game, shot play to Christian Watson happens, it might be this one. Not that I want that to happen, because I don't. In fact, I think it was Zach Cruz, but I can't remember, posted some kind of a stat regarding the first run play of the game has been gone for over 10 yards, I don't know. Let's just say 70% of the time. I'm making up the numbers, but it was something to that effect. The bottom line is they've been very good at opening up the game running the ball. But if Jordan is going to be insistent on pushing the ball 20-plus yards down the field as often as he does, we may actually find a little bit more success. Now, that relies on 2 very important things. Number 1, Jordan has to throw a good ball. Number 2, the guy has to catch the ball. But the bottom line is the opportunities should be there. Now, before we get on to the second thing, I just want to point a couple things out because I had a couple thoughts run through my head, and then I started going through stuff, and then I started getting annoyed. So I'm going to try to not make this an anti-Jordan Love rant, but I just want to go through a couple things. The first thought that came to my head is a lot of people are going to think when they hear me say that, that's why his completion rate is so low, that's why his accuracy is so low, that's why these things, because he has a higher difficulty of throwing or whatever. The problem is I can break it down by each individual category, and that's just not the reality. There might be some reality to that, but the bottom line is the accuracy, the grades, all that stuff is bad at every level, short, intermediate, and deep. I think let's go to short, because short is the one area where he actually does relatively well. And by relatively well, I mean his passing grade is a 79, which ranks 11th in the NFL. He has 7 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. 0 big-time throws, which is expected on short throws, but 2 turnover-worthy plays. That, I think, is his best area of the field. Of course, he ranks 29th in percentage of times that he actually tries to throw short. On intermediate passes, Jordan Love's PFF grade, his passing grade, is a 62.3. He ranks 34th out of 40 quarterbacks. He is below Bryce Young and ahead of Drake May. His adjusted completion percentage, which does not include drops, is 61.2%. He ranks 25th. 526 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He has 0 big-time throws even in this range and has 4 turnover-worthy plays. He is one of only 10 quarterbacks who has no big-time throws on intermediate passes, which are between 10 and 19 yards. Those are still relatively deep passes. The other quarterbacks are Tyler Huntley, Mason Rudolph, Jacoby Brissett, Justin Fields, Derek Carr, Trevor Lawrence, Gardner Minshew, Daniel Jones, and Bo Nix. In terms of how often he throws intermediate passes, 31st is where he ranks. 31st. So he doesn't throw a lot of short passes as a percentage, doesn't throw a lot of intermediate passes as a percentage, but deep passes, by God, he ranks second, 17.5% behind only Anthony Richardson. He has an 88.5 grade, which sounds great, but it ranks 17th between Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton. Adjusted completion percentage, he ranks 20th. 44.9% of his passes essentially are thrown at a receiver that doesn't drop it. He has 5 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. His big-time throw rate is 19.6%, which sounds awesome, but it ranks 33rd among 40 quarterbacks. So, it's not great. This also got me thinking about what I had mentioned before about Pro Football Reference having actual accuracy things, right? An accuracy rate percentage, whatever. This is where it kind of, I feel like the positive fans and negative fans are looking at two different metrics. Let's look at the positive fan metric first. As far as his bad throw percentage, from worst to best, he ranks 15th. So when it comes to bad throws, 16.1%, he's not the worst. If you put it in the other direction, as far as best to worst, he ranks 22nd, or tied for 21st with freaking Deshaun Watson. So, it could be worse, because again, there are quarterbacks who have more bad throws than he does, including Trevor Lawrence, Joe Flacco. I mean, you got Josh Allen is in this list, 17.5%. Rodgers is in the list, Stroud. Nobody else that's kind of relevant, but there are good quarterbacks who have more bad throws, I guess. That to me is the positive fan argument is it's not that bad. There's not that many bad throws, even though, again, he's 22nd worst at bad throws, but whatever. On the more negative side, there's another question. It's not just about bad throws. How many actual good throws are there? He is the 4th worst quarterback at throwing on target. You want to know how to get a lot of drops on your team? Off-target passes. There are so many times, and we all know this because we all argue about it, like, yeah, that should have been caught, but it should have been thrown better. Bottom line is, if you put Jordan Love on a different team, their drops are going to go up because drops are in part due to the receiver, in part due to the quarterback. If you throw too hard, if you throw too high, if you throw behind, if you throw too low, if you throw late and there are, defenders bearing down or whatever, these are different variables that could cause receivers to not have as high of a catch rate as they should. Jordan Love's on-target rate is 66.7%. The only quarterbacks that are worse are Gardner Minshew at 65.9, Caleb Williams at 60.1, and Anthony Richardson at 57.8. His accuracy is dog crap, and it's a big part of the reason why guys are dropping it. And again, we can sit here and say, well, you're an NFL receiver, you should have caught that right. But listen, there are ranges. If you throw a ball exactly where it's supposed to be, what percentage of the time is Dontavian Wicks going to catch it? If you throw the ball behind him, what percentage of the time is Dontavian Wicks going to catch it? This is very basic. Of course, if you throw better balls, there's going to be less drops. Just for reference, top of this list is Kirk Cousins at 80.1%. 80% of the time, that ball is not just to the receiver, it's on target. Meaning the receiver didn't have to slow down, he didn't have to turn around, he didn't have to dive in the dirt, he didn't have to jump up real high. It was just thrown to the receiver in stride. That means, by the way, Drake May, Bryce Young, Jameis Winston, Dak Prescott, Sam Darnold, Will Levis, Bo Nix, Joe Flacco, Trevor Lawrence, all these guys are more accurate. And again, he also ranks 22nd when it comes to bad throws, which is just that throw was garbage and probably not catchable. Again, I don't know their exact metrics and how they, let's look at their glossary. Let's see what it says here. If it gives any, no, it just says poor throws and on-target throws would have hit the intended receiver is all it really says. So again, there are opportunities here. This is a defense that has some struggles. Their pass rush is kind of iffy. I mean, there's data about that. They were one of the best pass rush teams the last 4 or so weeks, they're one of the worst pass rush teams. Very, very weird situation. So I don't know exactly what we're getting. But there are opportunities here against a secondary that is not very good and really, really struggles at giving up big plays. Bottom line, really need Jordan to step it up because good enough isn't good enough. Well, that technically could have been caught is no longer good enough. Throw the frickin' ball where it's supposed to be thrown. I guess before we move off this, let's stick to some other Jordan Love things. This, again, from NFL Pro. Jordan Love has completed just 40.5% of his passes when under pressure this season, which is the third lowest rate in the NFL. I told you about Tua and how he struggles with pressure. He does not struggle, apparently, as much as Jordan Love does. There's been a ton of stuff coming out about his statistics and how he's bottom of the league when he's being blitzed, and that is the case. He really, really struggles, and this is what I'm talking about him seemingly getting very flustered. I don't know if it's because he got injured, and now he's kind of hearing ghosts. He's a little bit nervous. He's scared of re-injuring it. I'm not exactly sure. Here's what it says. Though he has struggled to complete passes, Love has taken a sack on just 10.9% of his pressured dropbacks, the third lowest rate in the league. So he's really not sacked very often. He's really not pressured very often. But when they bring a blitz, he panics. After generating here's where it says what I was talking about. After generating the highest pressure rate in the league through the first 7 weeks of the season at 43.6%, the Dolphins have pressured opposing passers on just 29% of dropbacks since week 8, the sixth lowest in the NFL. Over the course of the season, the Dolphins have converted just 15% of their pressures into sacks, the third lowest pressure to sack conversion rate in the league. They are a very high blitz rate team, though. And that's the thing that scares me because it's not even necessarily the pressures, it's the blitz that causes Jordan to panic. Plays generally do not turn out very well when Jordan Love is blitzed, and this team blitzes a lot. If we flip back to PFF right now, under pressure, Jordan Love is the 29th ranked quarterback out of 40. He has a 48.7 grade, a 47 passing grade. He is completing 47% of his passes for 729 yards, 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He has 2 big-time throws and 6 turnover-worthy plays when he's pressured. When we're just talking blitzed, he is the 33rd ranked quarterback out of 39. Andy Dalton, Jacoby Brissett, Deshaun Watson, Spencer Rattler, Anthony Richardson, and Will Levis are the only worst quarterbacks when being blitzed. He has completed 56% of his passes, 618 yards, 5 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 2 big-time throws, 5 turnover-worthy plays. Remember, this has nothing to do with pressure necessarily. This is just when people send a blitz. By the way, he has been blitzed so far, the 11th most in the league. Part of this has to do with playing teams like Minnesota who do blitz a lot. Part of it at this point, honestly, and this is what's scary, has to do with the fact that teams now know that if you blitz Jordan, it's probably not going to go very well for the Packers. And so they're going to increase the amount of times that they blitz Jordan Love because it works. Now, this is hopefully where they get creative and find counters, and this is also probably why you have end-arounds and sweeps and screens and just run plays in general to try to keep people from doing all this stuff, to keep them back. But that's the point. We need to design ways to keep them from blitzing because when they blitz, it hurts us. Last note about passing, it's not really super relevant, but I want to brag about it. Chop Robinson has generated the second most pressures, 39, and highest pressure rate, 19.8, among rookies this season. After recording just 4 pressures and 0 sacks on 36 pass rush weeks 1 through 4, Robinson has recorded 35 and 3.5 sacks on 161 pass rushes, which is 21.7% pressure rate since week 5. Robinson's 21.7% pressure rate since week 5 is the second highest in the NFL. I had just mentioned that recently, that I bet if you look over the last several weeks, he's probably top in the NFL, and he is. I freaking knew it. I knew it. I don't remember the other guy I was really high on, but Chop was one of them. Dang it. He's so awesome to have Chop Robinson. You know, the good thing about, the thing I like about guys like Chop, and we'll see what happens. He may fall off or whatever. Hopefully he does because we got to play him today. He was a semi-late first-round pick. He wasn't number 1. He wasn't top 5. He wasn't top 10. He wasn't even top 20. I think he was picked 21. Guys like that exist. They're hard to find, but they exist outside of the top 10. Anyways, why don't we take our second break. We'll come back and we'll get into the next part, which, again, remember, that was meant to be kind of positive there. There's a window with the deep passing. When we come back, we'll look at the other thing that gives me hope for the offense, and it involves the run game. Go figure. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. All right, so as flimsy as this may be, we're going to run with it. Via Zach Cruz on X, Dolphins have the third lowest tackle grade at PFF and are about to face Josh Jacobs on a short week in the cold. I mean, really, this just takes what we've been saying all week and just puts a big exclamation point on it. The point is, in a sort of bad weather game, in a cold game, in a kind of windy game, especially when you have a good run game and a strong running back, running the ball makes a lot of sense. Ball control the time of control the clock, time of possession is what I was looking for. But again, we come back to what I've been saying about, Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst wanting a guy that is better at forcing missed tackles. It's something we've been missing, and now we have it. So you have one of the top guys at forcing missed tackles in the NFL going up against a team that is one of the worst tackling teams in all of football. And if you'd like a taste of what that might look like, do you know what the most similar team is in terms of tackling? The 49ers. I don't know where that narrative came from that the 49ers are a good tackling team, but according to PFF, they are the second worst tackling team. So the 49ers right now have a 37.1 tackling grade. The Miami Dolphins, 37.5. They're the two most similar teams. I don't mean in the NFL or whatever, but it is the most similar team to Miami. Miami is most similar to 49ers and vice versa. Compare that to some of the other teams we've faced. Chicago is the third best tackling team. Detroit is 6th. Minnesota is 7th. Tennessee is 8th. Philadelphia is 10th. The Colts are 15th. Jaguars are 16th. I mean, we've faced all basically top teams when it comes to bad tackling. The only bad tackling team we face so far is the 49ers. And we saw how that went. So, look, I mean, if you put the two things together, right, run the ball, run it a lot, run it down their throat, tire out their defense, etc., etc., etc. How do we tie in the other part? Oh, I have a thought. Play action shots. I'm not saying every single, like run, shot, run, shot. Not necessarily. But I think that game plan of run and then play the pass off of the run, as well as everything else, which, by the way, that's exactly how this offense is built. Everything is built off the run. Everything looks like a run, but sometimes it's a pass, and sometimes it's a sweep, and sometimes it's a screen, and sometimes, whatever. I mean, the puzzle pieces fit together perfectly. So what do we need to do? Execute. That's it. We need our offensive line to show up again. Continue doing a good job like you did last week, at least a good enough job to give Josh Jacobs an opportunity. Let him go out there and force missed tackles. If we can do that, we are 75% of the way there to winning the football game. The rest of it really just comes down to what? Minimize penalties, minimize mistakes, drops, picks, whatever, and then take advantage of opportunities that will be available in the passing game. Because if the running game is working to that extent, Matt LaFleur will get people open. NFL Pro has a slightly different take, but more or less the same in terms of Miami is bad. Josh Jacobs has forced 67 missed tackles this season, which is tied for third most in the NFL. He has amassed 740 rushing yards after contact, third most after Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. The Dolphins' defense has recorded a 13.2% missed tackle rate this season, which is the 17th lowest in the league. However, they have allowed 638 yards after missing tackles this season, which is 11th most in the league. So not only are they 17th lowest in tackling, but even worse than that, they're the 11th worst team in how much damage is done because of missed tackles. Final note on the rushing here. Dolphins defense has allowed plus 151 rush yards over expected on designed runs this season, which is the 7th most in the NFL, while they have limited opposing ball carriers to a league low 0.4 yards before contact per carry. They have surrendered a league-high 4 yards after contact per carry on such plays. So there you go. Run the ball well, and then just minimize mistakes, and we should be okay. We haven't really talked about the defense all that much. At this point, we've kind of come up with a way to keep the ball out of their hands relatively. I always thought that was kind of weird because you have to take turns either way, so it's not like you're able to score more points than they are, but it's at least keeping it from being a shootout, and then more or less written the game plan to optimize scoring when you have it, right? How do you make sure that you have the ball, keep the ball, tire their defense, and then score? I don't have as clear of a path for the defense. I genuinely think, first of all, don't be the Dolphins. What I mean by that is, like I said, we all think of them as this big downfield explosive play offense, and obviously they can be, but where they really are excelling is the short, quick passes. What does that mean? You got to tackle. You got to rally, you got to tackle. If they want to take 5 yards, okay, fine, don't let it be 6, 7, 8, 20. Obviously, if this is their game plan on top of that, disruption with press man, all that kind of stuff can be kind of beneficial. But beyond all that, leaving aside the specifics or whatever, I'll let Jeff Hafley kind of figure that all out because I don't know. Again, take your own game plan and don't let them execute it. Don't be a team that can't tackle. Don't be a team that can't stop the run. Because if they start doing that to us, that's a problem. Look, the bottom line is I see this game potentially, and this is another reason why it should go in our favor. Not saying it will, but it should. Teams like the Dolphins are built for speed. First of all, we know that that's already going to be diminished a little bit because of the cold weather. It's not ideal. But also think about it in terms of Green Bay Packers versus 49ers, except in this case, Miami is the Packers and the Packers are the 49ers. All these high-flying offenses, what is their kryptonite? What was always our kryptonite? Strong, physical, smash-mouth defenses. These are smaller, faster guys. Again, they've got talented running backs, for example. But they're smaller guys built like Aaron Jones that generally are looking at like 15 carries instead of 25. How many times are they going to want to be smashed into? I don't think they're going to like it very much. Looking at the weather right now, again, projected to be somewhere probably late at night in the 20s. Precipitation still looks very, very unlikely. But as of right now, Thursday night, 19 degrees. Winds 10 to 20 miles per hour. To be clear, for those of you that aren't very familiar with the cold, wind chill is the absolute most important factor. If it's 19 degrees and it's 10 mile per hour winds, it feels like 7 degrees. If it's 20 mile per hour winds, it feels like 3 degrees. So there are going to be times during this game it feels like 0. That's frigid cold. That's when cold starts to hurt. I mean, 19 degrees is too, but I mean, without even being hit, your skin is going to start feeling pain in this cold. And then you go out there and you see these guys flying around. I just thinking about it, the last thing I want is some guy hitting me real hard. Just hitting my fingers, bro. Dang it. It hurts so bad. Just be the physical team. Anyways, final thing here. Looking at the final injury report, officially out, Jair Alexander, Edgerrin Cooper, and Romeo Doubs. John Fitzpatrick, Isaiah McDuffie, and Josh Myers are questionable. Josh Myers was a full participant. Josh Myers is going to be kind of a big deal because with Jordan Morgan now on IR, we're running out of bodies. Bottom line is we're going to have to see somebody come in and play. The only thing I could possibly think would either be, number one, put Jacob Monk right in at center, which I think he's ready to. I mean, he was listed as inactive this past week, but I don't think that was because of injury. So I think he's ready to rock and roll. Otherwise, what we would probably have to do is move Zach Tom to center and then take one of our other tackles. We got Andre Dillard, Kadeem Telford, and Travis Glover. I don't know which it would be. I would probably lean Dillard because I seem to kind of like him down the stretch. Although Dillard did play, I think, mostly left tackle, so maybe if they want to stick with their right tackle, that would be Kadeem Telford. Either way, not ideal at all. So it's kind of a big deal, this whole Josh Myers thing. It's maybe a little bit less of a big deal if it's more about running the ball and getting the ball out quickly kind of thing. But either way, I mean, having a good offensive line is always incredibly important. And whatever you think about Josh Myers, losing him and losing Zach Tom at tackle and replacing him with some, it's an iffy thing. And I don't know that Zach Tom instantly goes in and dominates as a center, because when was the last time he did that, So the depth there is becoming a problem for sure. And we really hope that Josh Myers will be able to play. He has a pectoral injury. As for the Miami Dolphins, officially out Kendall Fuller and Tyus Bowser. We kind of had mentioned that we knew that was going to happen. Otherwise, Teron Armstead did not practice again. That is fantastic news for us. That's the same thing we faced last week. Left tackle didn't practice in any of the games, any of the 3 or 4 practices, whatever, and ended up being questionable. And despite the optimism, when it came game time, he did not play. So we will have to see. This is probably going to be one of those game time decisions. So we will see if Teron Armstead can go. That's a massive one for them. Otherwise, the only other person that didn't participate was linebacker Anthony Walker. In fact, I think Walker was the one that was not supposed to be playing, so I'm guessing he won't play. It just says unspecified. I don't believe he's going to be playing. At least that's what the word on the street was. Otherwise, everybody was a full participant for Miami, so expect them to be out there. With that, though, I'm going to head out of here. You guys have a good rest of your day, and hopefully I'll be talking to you tomorrow for Victory Friday. Have a good one. Bye-bye.